Buen día amigos y bienvenidos al canal. Y para mis suscriptores, bienvenidos de nuevo. Soy Austin y el video de hoy concluye nuestra serie sobre las conjugaciones verbales en español. ¿Estás listo para terminar esto? Pues vamos. Now, if you've been following the series up to this point, you're fully up to speed on 18 of the 23 Spanish verb tenses. Today's video covers the final 5. I truly believe that understanding all verb tenses as quickly as possible is our best first step to learning Spanish. That's what worked for me to quickly become conversationally fluent in the language. Today's video rounds out our conjugations with the progressive aspect to talk about ongoing actions that are happening at some point in time. Just like my last video taught you the perfect aspect by conjugating haber into the tenses we had already learned, today we're learning to conjugate estar in 5 tenses with the progressive aspect to say what is, was, will be, or would be happening. So just like my last video, I'm not technically teaching you any new tenses at all today. So let's get right to it. Before we get started conjugating estar, we gotta first talk about what comes immediately after it. All Spanish progressive tenses are built using the present participle, also called the gerund, of our target verb, which in English is the ing form of verbs. In English, we simply take the infinitive verb and add ing to the end to make the gerund, like eating, cooking, cleaning, etc. In Spanish, it's a little more complicated. There are 2 endings that we use to form the Spanish gerund: ando for use with AR verbs, and yendo for ER and IR verbs. So we need to drop the last 2 letters from the ending and plug in our ending. Easy peasy, right? Okay. Now, there are certain irregular verbs that are irregular as a present participle because their stem changes before the ending. I'll throw some examples up on the screen now if you want to pause to review. But for the most part, we simply drop AR, ER, or IR and add the ending. Then there are times where instead of using an I with yendo, we replace it with a Y. But I don't exactly consider that to be irregular, since it's kind of expected when you start to have a deeper understanding of pronunciation and spelling. That'll make more sense as you gain experience in the language, and even more sense after I do my video on pronouncing vowels. Now, I need to make sure you understand this, so listen closely. We as English speakers tend to use our verbs with the progressive aspect very often, like when we say, I'm going now, I'm flying out tomorrow, or I was looking for that. We as English speakers need to break that mode of thinking when we express our thoughts in Spanish. The tenses you've already learned up to this point are usually perfectly adequate for expressing ongoing actions, and honestly are oftentimes the preferred way to conjugate. So our examples from earlier would be better off simply saying ya voy, vuelo mañana, and buscaba eso. Something else I need to make sure you understand: we cannot use the present participle to talk about the general act of doing something. It's only for specific ongoing actions at a specific point in time. So if we want to say, do you like swimming? That translates to te gusta nadar, and we leave nadar in the infinitive. We can never, ever, ever say te gusta nadando. It's just wrong. Don't ever do it. Another example is, I had cleaned my suit before putting it on, which is, ya había limpiado mi traje antes de ponérmelo. Here we say ponérmelo to translate putting it on. And even though we use that ing form in English, in Spanish, we must use the infinitive here. So it's starting to sound like the progressive is, well, kind of useless, right? Well, no. We use this aspect when we want to specifically emphasize the ongoing nature of an action, usually to contextualize how that ongoing action affects or is affected by other things that are going on. If that doesn't make too much sense to you quite yet, just sit tight and it'll be clear soon enough. All right. Something else to note is that unlike most verb conjugations in Spanish, any object pronouns that modify the action verb can be tacked on to the end of the gerund form rather than having to go before our conjugated estar. I've gone in depth on object pronouns in my video on the imperative mood, so you can reference that video if you want to refresh yourself. If we need to add any object pronouns, we have to change the spelling of the present participle so that we retain the same stressed syllable under standard pronunciation rules. For example, to say, you are talking to me, we can say, me estás hablando, or you can move the pronoun to the end of the gerund and say, estás hablándome, making sure to add that accent mark to keep the stress on the same syllable. Okay, so now that we have the gerund figured out, next we need to learn how to conjugate the verb estar in the proper form, and we'll be all set. The 5 sets of conjugations we'll need for the progressive tenses are all in the indicative mood, and they are the simple present, the preterite, the imperfect, the future, and the conditional. Starting with the present progressive is what we use to describe actions that are currently ongoing. Like I mentioned, we want to make sure not to overuse this tense. Although it's not an exact science, a good rule of thumb is to use the simple present in most cases and use the present progressive to describe actions when we want to specifically emphasize the ongoing nature of that action. To conjugate the present progressive, we'll first conjugate estar in the present tense, then add the present participle, the gerund verb, afterwards. Estar is irregular in the present tense, and the conjugations are as follows. Yo estoy, tú, vos estás, él, ella, usted está, nosotros, nosotras estamos, vosotros, vosotras estáis, and ellos, ellas, ustedes están. So to say, are you taking these glasses with you? That's, ¿estás llevándote estas gafas? Or, ¿te estás llevando estas gafas? Side note, part of the reason why estar is irregular is apparent in this example, because without the accent to stress the second syllable, we're saying estas, which means these to refer to feminine nouns like gafas or glasses. I'll do another video sometime to explain how all these words on screen are alike and different. Okay, now moving into the 2 past tenses, the preterite progressive is used to describe actions that were ongoing in the past for a definite amount of time, with a clear start and stop point. For this tense, we conjugate estar in the preterite form, which is irregular here, and add the gerund. The conjugations for estar are as follows. Yo estuve, tú, vos estuviste, él, ella, usted estuvo, nosotros, nosotras estuvimos, vosotros, vosotras estuvisteis, and ellos, ellas, ustedes estuvieron. So to say, I didn't sleep so much last night, I was editing my video until 2 in the morning. That's, no dormí tanto anoche, estuve editando mi video hasta las 2 de la madrugada. Side note, some of you might be wondering, I thought mañana was the word for morning, so why'd you say madrugada, Austin? Well, you're right, it is the word for morning, but madrugada is the word for early morning and only applies before dawn. So, since we're talking about an action up until 2 a.m., it fits this example better. Alright, so our other past tense is the imperfect progressive, which describes actions that were ongoing in the past for an indefinite amount of time and is often used with actions that were ongoing until they were interrupted by something else happening. Of the 2 past progressive tenses, this is generally the more commonly used one. Estar will need to be conjugated in the imperfect tense, which is regular here, then add the gerund. So the conjugations for estar are yo estaba, tú, vos estabas, él, ella, usted estaba, nosotros, nosotras estábamos, vosotros, vosotras estabais, and ellos, ellas, ustedes estaban. So to say, I was cleaning my room when the phone rang, that gives us estaba limpiando mi cuarto cuando sonó el teléfono. Alright, now let's turn our attention to ongoing actions that will take place in the future using the future progressive. To conjugate the future, we can use one of 2 forms. We can conjugate the verb ir in the simple present tense, followed by a estar and our gerund, or we can conjugate estar in the future tense, then add the gerund. The ir a estar form translates to going to be, whereas the future estar form translates to will be. I've already covered gonna versus will in my future tense video, and you can check that out with the link up top if you want a refresher. The future conjugations for estar are regular here, and they are yo estaré, tú, vos estarás, él, ella, usted estará, nosotros, nosotras estaremos, vosotros, vosotras estaréis, and ellos, ellas, ustedes estarán. So to say, I'm going to be working tomorrow during the party, that's voy a estar trabajando mañana durante la fiesta. But to say, I will be working, that's estaré trabajando. All right, finally, the 23rd of our 23 tenses is the conditional progressive. Congrats on making it all the way to the very end of the series, and thank you so much for following along. Now, this form is how we say that the subject would be doing something ongoing, used in more hypothetical situations. One thing we should note is that the conditional tense is oftentimes paired up with the imperfect subjunctive, which I've already covered earlier in the series. The conditional progressive uses estar conjugated in the conditional tense, and it is regular here, followed by the gerund. Just like our other tenses, the conjugations are as follows. Yo estaría, tú, vos estarías, él, ella, usted estaría, nosotros, nosotras estaríamos, vosotros, vosotras estaríais, and ellos, ellas, ustedes estarían. So to say, if you had come to the party, you'd be learning to play beer pong right now. That translates to, si hubieras venido a la fiesta, estarías aprendiendo a jugar beer pong ahora mismo. All right, before moving on, I just want to reiterate my earlier point. Use the progressive tenses only when you want to call specific attention to the fact that the action is ongoing. All of these examples I just gave you could also be conjugated without using the progressive aspect and just conjugate our target verb in the same tense that estar got conjugated into. All right, now before we move on, I just want to take a second to personally thank every single one of you out there for watching my video and investing your time with me today. I know how busy today's world is, and investing your time in anything is hard enough already. The fact that you're here now trusting me to help guide you on your learning journey, that means the world to me. This is a small channel. I'm just one guy with a laptop, an iPhone, a little free time, and a big dream of helping others how I wish I'd been helped when I was figuring all this out for myself. If you're finding value in my content, please help me grow my new channel with a like and a comment. And if you want to keep learning with me, make sure you subscribe and ring that bell to be notified of all my videos. Now, I've decided to take my teaching to the next level by offering private lessons to motivated learners. So if you're interested in learning directly from me, either in a one-on-one or group setting, comment down below or email me at austinteachesspanish@gmail.com, and I'll let you know how and when we can make that happen. Also, if you want to access my conjugation spreadsheet to help with understanding the differences between all different subjects, the verb moods, the tenses, conjugation patterns for all regular verbs, and conjugations for the most common irregular verbs, let me know as well. Thank you again for your time today. Now, let's get back to the lesson. So, now that we know how to use the progressive aspect with estar and the present participle, let's do a few practice rounds. Like usual, I'm going to give you some example sentences in English and translate them into Spanish with our target verbs unconjugated. It's going to be up to you to find the correct present participle for our target verb and correctly conjugate estar. Our first example is, I can't go out with you guys tonight. I'm actually waiting for my girlfriend right now. Our unconjugated translation is, no puedo salir con ustedes esta noche. De verdad, esperar a mi novia en este momento. Quick note, in this example, I'm using de verdad to say actually. You might have heard the word actualmente before, but that's a false cognate, which translates to currently. Make sure you only use actualmente when you want to say currently, and you never use it to say actually. All right, so, you ready for the answer? No puedo salir con ustedes esta noche. De verdad, estoy esperando a mi novia en este momento. All right, our next example is, I wouldn't be walking if my car were fixed. Our translation is, no estar caminar si mi carro estuviera reparado. Remember which tense is used when we do our if-would statements? Our answer is, no estaría caminando si mi carro estuviera reparado. Are you ready for our final example? I was still eating dinner when I heard the gunshots outside. This translates to, todavía estar cenar cuando oí los tiros afuera. Side note, Spanish has a lot of very specific vocabulary which just cannot be expressed in English using one single word. So the verb here is cenar, which means to eat dinner. We also have almorzar, to eat lunch, and desayunar, which, as you can probably guess, means to eat breakfast. Two of my personal favorite ultra-specific Spanish verbs are the reflexive verb desvelarse, which means to be unable to get to sleep, and becar, which means to award a scholarship to. All right, back to our example. Ready for the answer? Todavía estaba cenando cuando oí los tiros afuera. All right, so how'd you do? Did you get all the answers right? If so, felicidades, eres muy listo. If you missed any, the fact alone that you're willing to try puts you leagues above most others. Fluency doesn't happen overnight, and as long as you stay curious and keep trying, I promise you will get there. Now, before we wrap up, I want to share with you 3 other verbs besides estar, which work really nicely with the progressive aspect: ir, seguir, and terminar. These verbs can be conjugated in all the same tenses as estar, followed immediately by the gerund, to talk about ongoing actions within certain contexts. Now, ir is the closest match to estar and can be used to add extra emphasis to the ongoing nature of the action. So to say, I was going crazy, we can say, me estaba volviendo loco, or me iba volviendo loco. The difference is somewhat subtle, but it paints a picture of the ongoing action progressing bit by bit. Next up, seguir, which is usually to follow, but sometimes can be used to say to continue, can be used to highlight that an ongoing action is still going on and hasn't finished yet. So if we want to ask our friend, are you still working? We could say, todavía estás trabajando, but it's really common to just say, ¿sigues trabajando? Lastly, terminar, which means to finish or end, can be used to say what we ended up doing. So to say, I was really busy, so I ended up having chips for lunch. We can say, estaba muy ocupado, así que terminé almorzando papitas. Well, folks, lo logramos. That's the end of our conjugation boot camp. Now, I know all the videos in this series provide a ton of very in-depth information. I tried my hardest to distill everything down while making sure not to leave out any important information. But I know that understanding everything I've gone over may require rewatches and focused study. But I really wanted to put out these videos first so they're available for you to use at any time as a reference as we start to dive into the Spanish-speaking world. That's the same reason why I timestamp chapters in these videos so you can get straight to the specific info you need when you need it. If you've watched the whole series up to this point, you have a tremendous leg up as we go forward with the channel. So, where do we go from here? Well, first off, please like this video if you haven't already. That helps both me and the algorithm know that these videos deserve an audience. Like always, I encourage you to comment and practice what you've been learning and share with me any questions you might have. I reply to all comments, even if they're just a simple, thanks for the video. Now, my next video is going to zoom out to look at the overall language learning process. I'll share with you what worked for me to quickly become fluent in the language, and I'll explain my plans to help you on your learning journey going forward. Eso es todo para este video. Espero que hayas aprendido algo útil hoy. Gracias por ser tan paciente conmigo a lo largo de esta serie. Nos vemos pronto. ¡Chao!